The rain pounded against the windshield as Helen clutched her chest, trying to catch her breath. Her daughter Lisa gripped the steering wheel tighter, stealing worried glances at her mother in the passenger seat. Something was very wrong, and they both knew it. "We're almost there, Mom," Lisa said, her voice barely hiding her panic. "Just hold on." Helen had been feeling strange all afternoon. It started as a dull ache in her chest, something she might have ignored on any other day. But this was different. The pain grew stronger, spreading down her left arm and up into her jaw. She felt like an invisible weight was pressing down on her chest, making every breath a struggle. At 76 years old, Helen had experienced her share of aches and pains, but this was unlike anything she had ever felt before. When she called Lisa, her voice was shaky and filled with fear. "Something's not right," she had whispered into the phone. "I think I need to go to the hospital." Lisa had dropped everything and rushed to her mother's house. She found Helen sitting in her favorite armchair, pale as a ghost, with beads of sweat on her forehead despite the cool evening air. Without hesitation, Lisa helped her mother to the car and drove straight to Riverside Medical Center. The emergency room was buzzing with activity when they arrived. Nurses moved quickly between patients, monitors beeped constantly, and the smell of antiseptic filled the air. Lisa helped her mother to the reception desk, where a tired-looking woman in scrubs looked up from her computer. "What seems to be the problem tonight?" the nurse asked, not looking directly at Helen. "My chest hurts really bad," Helen said, pressing her hand to her heart. "It's been going on for hours and it's getting worse. I can barely breathe." The nurse glanced at Helen's age on her driver's license and began typing. "Any history of heart problems?" "No, but my husband died 6 months ago," Helen replied, her voice trembling. "I've been under a lot of stress lately. I sometimes get anxious, but this feels completely different." Lisa stepped forward. She's never complained about chest pain before. She's usually so strong and independent. For her to ask to come to the hospital, something has to be seriously wrong. The nurse nodded absently and handed Helen a clipboard with forms to fill out. "Take a seat in the waiting area. Someone will call you back shortly." They found 2 empty chairs in the crowded waiting room. Helen struggled to focus on the paperwork as waves of pain washed over her. Her handwriting, usually neat and precise, looked shaky and uneven. Lisa helped her mother complete the forms, growing more worried by the minute as she watched Helen's face grow paler. After what felt like an eternity, but was actually only 30 minutes, a nurse called Helen's name. They were led to a small examination room where Helen changed into a hospital gown and lay down on the narrow bed. The paper crinkled beneath her as she tried to find a comfortable position. Dr. Williams entered the room 15 minutes later, looking rushed and slightly irritated. He was young, probably in his early 30s, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested he had been working long hours. He barely glanced at Helen before opening her chart on his tablet. "Mrs. Peterson, I see you're experiencing some chest discomfort," he said without looking up. "Tell me about your symptoms." Helen described the pain in detail, how it had started gradually and then become overwhelming. She explained how it felt like someone was sitting on her chest, how she couldn't take deep breaths, and how the pain spread to her arm and jaw. She mentioned again that she had been dealing with grief since her husband's death, but insisted this felt nothing like anxiety. Dr. Williams finally looked at her, but only briefly. He saw an elderly woman recently widowed with a history of stress and anxiety. In his mind, the pieces seemed to fit together perfectly. Grief, anxiety, stress, these were common causes of chest pain in older patients, especially women who had recently lost their spouses. "I'm going to listen to your heart and lungs," he said, placing his stethoscope on Helen's chest for less than a minute. He moved it to a few different spots, nodding as if confirming what he already believed. Lisa stood in the corner watching carefully. "Doctor, she's never acted like this before. She's one of the toughest people I know. If she says something's wrong, something's wrong." Dr. Williams glanced at Lisa with a slightly condescending smile. "Adult children often worry more than necessary. It's natural to be concerned, especially after losing a parent." He turned back to Helen. "Mrs. Peterson, what you're experiencing is very common for someone in your situation. Losing a spouse is one of life's most stressful events, and grief can manifest in many physical ways. Your symptoms are consistent with anxiety and panic, which often accompany the grieving process." Helen felt a sinking feeling in her stomach that had nothing to do with her physical pain. "But doctor, I know what grief feels like. I've been sad, I've cried, I've felt lost. This is different." This is physical pain, real pain. Anxiety can cause very real physical symptoms, Dr. Williams explained, already reaching for his prescription pad. Chest pain, difficulty breathing, sweating. These are all classic signs of a panic attack. The mind and body are closely connected, especially during times of emotional stress. Lisa stepped closer to the bed. Shouldn't you run some tests? Check her heart? Do an EKG or something? Dr. Williams looked annoyed by the suggestion. Mrs. Peterson doesn't present with the typical risk factors for cardiac events. She's a relatively healthy 76-year-old woman with no history of heart disease. Her symptoms, combined with her recent loss in age, strongly suggest anxiety. Running unnecessary tests would expose her to radiation and waste valuable resources that could be used for patients with true emergencies. He scribbled something on his prescription pad and tore off the paper. I'm prescribing a mild anti-anxiety medication. Take one tablet now and another tonight if needed. You should feel better within a few hours. I also recommend you follow up with your family doctor next week to discuss grief counseling options. Helen took the prescription with shaking hands. Are you sure? This really doesn't feel like anxiety to me. I understand your concern, Dr. Williams said, already moving toward the door. But I've seen hundreds of cases like this. Grief affects everyone differently, and physical symptoms are more common than people realize. The medication will help, and if you're still feeling anxious in a few days, your family doctor can adjust the dosage. As they prepared to leave, Helen struggled to stand up from the examination table. The pain in her chest seemed to intensify with movement, and she had to pause to catch her breath. Lisa noticed her mother's lips had a slightly blue tint, but when she mentioned it to the nurse, she was told it was probably from the cool air in the room. Walking to the car, Helen felt defeated and confused. She had always trusted doctors, had always believed they would listen to her concerns and take them seriously, but tonight she felt dismissed and unheard. The pain in her chest was still there, just as strong as when they had arrived. Maybe he's right, Helen said quietly as Lisa helped her into the passenger seat. Maybe I'm just falling apart after losing your father. Lisa squeezed her mother's hand. You're not falling apart, Mom. You're the strongest person I know. If you say something's wrong, I believe you. As they drove home through the rain, neither of them could shake the feeling that something important had been missed. Helen clutched the prescription bottle, hoping the doctor was right but fearing he was wrong. The pain in her chest seemed to pulse with each heartbeat, as if her body was trying to tell her something that no one was willing to hear. That night, Helen sat in her recliner, unable to lie flat because it made the pain worse. She took the prescribed medication, but it did nothing to ease her discomfort. As she watched the clock tick past midnight, she wondered if she was losing her mind or if something was seriously wrong with her body. Either way, she felt more alone than she had since her husband's death, dismissed by the very people who were supposed to help her when she needed it most. Helen barely slept that first night. Every time she tried to lie down, the crushing pain in her chest got worse, making it impossible to breathe normally. She spent most of the night propped up in her living room recliner, dozing fitfully and waking up every hour with the same terrible discomfort. By morning, she felt exhausted and weak. The medication Dr. Williams had prescribed seemed to do nothing at all. If anything, the pain felt stronger than it had the night before. When she tried to stand up to make coffee, dizziness washed over her and she had to sit back down immediately. Lisa called around 9 in the morning to check on her mother. How are you feeling, Mom? Did the medicine help? Helen hesitated before answering. She didn't want to worry her daughter, but she also couldn't lie about how terrible she felt. I'm still having the chest pain, honey. It didn't really get better overnight. Maybe you should call your regular doctor, Lisa suggested. Dr. Williams said to follow up if you weren't feeling better. But Helen's family doctor couldn't see her for 3 days. The receptionist suggested she go back to the emergency room if her symptoms got worse. But Helen felt embarrassed about the idea of returning so soon after being told her pain was just anxiety. Instead, she spent Wednesday trying to rest and hoping the medication would eventually kick in. She forced herself to eat some toast for breakfast, but her stomach felt queasy and unsettled. The simplest tasks, like walking to the bathroom or getting a drink of water, left her breathless and exhausted. Around noon, Lisa stopped by to bring her mother some soup. She was shocked by what she saw. In less than 24 hours, Helen seemed to have aged 10 years. Her skin had a grayish color and she was breathing in quick, shallow gasps. "Mom, you look terrible," Lisa said, sitting down beside her mother's chair. Are you sure you're okay? Helen tried to smile, but even that seemed to take effort. I just feel so tired. And this pain won't go away. It's like someone squeezing my chest in a vice. Lisa felt her mother's forehead, which was cool and clammy despite the warm day. I think we should call the hospital and ask to speak to someone. This doesn't seem normal. They called Riverside Medical Center, and Lisa explained her mother's ongoing symptoms to the nurse who answered. The nurse, who hadn't been there the night before, listened patiently and then put them on hold to check with someone else. The doctor who saw your mother last night noted that she was experiencing anxiety related to grief, the nurse said when she came back on the line. Anxiety episodes can sometimes last several days, especially in older patients dealing with loss. Has she been taking the prescribed medication? Yes, but it's not helping at all, Lisa said, frustration creeping into her voice. She's getting worse, not better. Sometimes it takes time for anti-anxiety medications to work effectively. If she's still experiencing symptoms in a few days, you should definitely follow up with her primary care physician. In the meantime, encourage her to rest and try some relaxation techniques. After hanging up, Lisa felt more worried than ever. Her mother had always been incredibly strong and independent. Even after her father's death, Helen had continued taking care of herself, maintaining her house and staying active in her community. This weak, pale woman sitting in the recliner seemed like a completely different person. Wednesday night was even worse than Tuesday. Helen couldn't find any position that made breathing comfortable. She tried lying in bed, but within minutes she felt like she was suffocating. She moved back to the recliner, but even sitting up didn't provide much relief. Around 3 a.m, she called Lisa in a panic. I can't breathe, she whispered into the phone. I feel like I'm drowning. Lisa was at her mother's house within 15 minutes. She found Helen sitting on the edge of the recliner, leaning forward and struggling for each breath. Her lips had a distinctly blue tint and her fingernails looked pale and colorless. We're going back to the hospital, Lisa said firmly. I don't care what they said yesterday. This is not anxiety. But Helen was afraid of being dismissed again. What if they just send me home with more pills? What if they think I'm just a hysterical old woman? Then we'll demand they listen to us, Lisa replied, helping her mother to the car. Something is really wrong and we're not leaving until they figure out what it is. Thursday morning brought no relief. If anything, Helen felt worse than ever. Her chest pain had spread to her back and she was having trouble staying awake. Lisa had spent the night on her mother's couch, checking on her every hour and growing more frightened each time. Around 10 a.m, Helen tried to get up to use the bathroom. She stood slowly, holding onto the arm of the chair for support, but after just 2 steps, her legs gave out completely. She collapsed to the floor with a soft thud, conscious but unable to get back up. Mom. Lisa rushed to her side and found Helen lying on the carpet, her breathing rapid and shallow. Her skin was gray and sweaty, and when Lisa took her hand, it felt cold and clammy. I can't catch my breath, Helen gasped. Everything hurts. This time, Lisa didn't hesitate. She called 911 immediately, her hands shaking as she dialed. I need an ambulance right away. My mother collapsed and she's having trouble breathing. The emergency dispatcher asked several questions about Helen's condition and symptoms. Lisa described everything she had observed over the past 2 days. The ongoing chest pain, the difficulty breathing, the grayish skin color, and now the collapse. The paramedics are on their way, the dispatcher said. Try to keep your mother calm and comfortable. Don't let her try to stand up again. While they waited for the ambulance, Lisa sat on the floor next to her mother, holding her hand and trying to stay calm. Helen seemed to be getting weaker by the minute. Her eyes kept fluttering closed and she was having trouble forming complete sentences. I'm scared, Helen whispered. Something's really wrong with me, isn't it? The paramedics will know what to do, Lisa said, though her own fear was growing by the second. They'll take good care of you. When the ambulance arrived, the 2 paramedics moved quickly and efficiently. The older one, a man named Tom, immediately noticed Helen's distressed breathing and pale color. He knelt beside her and began asking questions while his partner prepared equipment. How long has she been having trouble breathing? Tom asked Lisa while checking Helen's pulse. Since Tuesday night. We went to the emergency room, but they said it was anxiety from grief. She's been getting worse ever since. Tom frowned as he felt Helen's weak, irregular pulse. Ma'am, can you tell me about your chest pain? When did it start? Helen struggled to answer. Tuesday afternoon. Crushing pain. Can't breathe. Getting worse. The younger paramedic had already connected Helen to a portable heart monitor and was checking her blood pressure. The numbers made him exchange a concerned look with his partner. "We need to get her to the hospital right away," Tom said, preparing a stretcher. "Her vital signs are not good." As they carefully moved Helen onto the stretcher, she grabbed Lisa's hand weakly. "Don't leave me," she whispered. "I'll be right behind the ambulance," Lisa promised. "I'm not going anywhere." During the ride to the hospital, Helen's condition continued to deteriorate. Her oxygen levels were dangerously low despite the mask they had placed over her face. Tom radioed ahead to the emergency room, his voice urgent and professional. "We're bringing in a 76-year-old female with severe respiratory distress and chest pain. History of symptoms for approximately 48 hours. Blood pressure is 90/60, pulse is weak and irregular. Oxygen saturation is 85% on high-flow oxygen." The response from the hospital was immediate. "Copy that. We'll have a team ready for cardiac workup." As the ambulance pulled into the hospital bay, Helen looked up at the bright lights and felt a mixture of relief and terror. Finally, someone was taking her seriously. But she couldn't shake the feeling that precious time had been lost, and she wondered if it might be too late for whatever was wrong with her body. The paramedics rushed her stretcher through the automatic doors, and Helen caught a glimpse of Lisa running behind them, her face filled with fear and determination. Whatever happened next, at least she wouldn't be dismissed again. The question was whether her body could hold on long enough for the doctors to figure out what they had missed 2 days earlier. The emergency room doors burst open as the paramedics wheeled Helen inside. The same fluorescent lights that had seemed so ordinary 2 nights before now felt harsh and urgent. This time, everything was different. This time, people were running. Dr. Williams was on duty again, but he didn't immediately recognize the frail woman on the stretcher as the same patient he had dismissed 48 hours earlier. The paramedics' radio report had triggered the hospital's heart attack protocol, and within seconds, Helen was surrounded by a team of nurses and technicians. "Room 3 is ready," called out Jenny, the head nurse. "Let's get her connected to everything." They transferred Helen from the ambulance stretcher to a hospital bed with practiced efficiency. Within moments, she was connected to a heart monitor, had an IV line in her arm and an oxygen mask covering her face. The rhythmic beeping of machines filled the small room as her vital signs appeared on multiple screens. Lisa stood in the corner, trying to stay out of the way while keeping her eyes fixed on her mother. Helen looked so small and fragile, surrounded by all the medical equipment. Her skin was still that frightening gray color, and her breathing remained labored despite the oxygen. Dr. Williams entered the room and began reading the paramedic's report on his tablet. Severe respiratory distress, chest pain for 48 hours, low blood pressure, irregular pulse. As he looked up at the patient for the first time, something nagged at the back of his mind. He glanced at the chart. "Mrs. Peterson, can you tell me when your chest pain started?" Helen turned her head slightly toward the doctor, her voice muffled by the oxygen mask. "Tuesday afternoon came here. You said anxiety." The words hit Dr. Williams like a physical blow. His eyes widened as he looked more closely at Helen's face, and suddenly he remembered. This was the elderly woman he had diagnosed with grief-related anxiety. The woman whose daughter had insisted something was seriously wrong. The woman he had sent home with anti-anxiety medication. "Get me a 12-lead EKG right now," he ordered, his voice suddenly urgent. "And I need cardiac enzymes, complete blood count, and a chest X-ray stat." The nurse looked surprised by the sudden intensity in his voice. "Doctor, is everything okay?" "Just get those tests done immediately," he replied, his mind racing. If this woman had been having a heart attack for 2 days, the EKG technician arrived within minutes and began placing electrodes on Helen's chest. Lisa watched nervously as the technician worked, not understanding what was happening but sensing the change in everyone's urgency. "What are all these tests for?" Lisa asked Dr. Williams. "Is this still about anxiety?" Dr. Williams couldn't meet her eyes. "We're just being thorough," he said, though his stomach was churning with dread. The EKG machine began printing out a long strip of paper showing Helen's heart rhythm. The technician frowned as she looked at the readout, then checked the machine settings to make sure everything was working properly. "Doctor," she called out quietly, "you need to see this." Dr. Williams walked over and took the EKG strip from her hands. What he saw made his blood run cold. The pattern on the paper showed clear signs of a massive heart attack. Not a recent one, but one that had been going on for days. The damage visible on the EKG suggested that Helen's heart muscle had been dying while she sat at home taking anxiety medication. "Oh no," he whispered under his breath, staring at the devastating evidence of his mistake. Within minutes, the blood test results appeared on his computer screen. Helen's cardiac enzyme levels were through the roof, numbers that indicated severe and prolonged damage to her heart muscle. The chest X-ray showed fluid backing up into her lungs, explaining why she had felt like she was drowning. Dr. Williams stood frozen for a moment, the full weight of his error crashing down on him. This woman had been having a heart attack when she first came to the emergency room. All of her symptoms, the chest pain, the shortness of breath, the arm pain, were classic signs of cardiac problems, especially in women. But he had been so sure he knew what was wrong that he hadn't even considered ordering basic heart tests. "Doctor?" Jenny approached him cautiously. "The cardiac enzymes are critically elevated. Should I call cardiology?" "Yes," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Call them now. Tell them we have a massive heart attack that's been going on for approximately 60 hours. The nurses exchanged worried glances. 60 hours was an extremely long time for heart muscle to be deprived of oxygen. Many patients didn't survive that kind of prolonged damage. Within minutes, Dr. Rodriguez, the cardiology specialist, arrived in the emergency room. She took one look at Helen's test results and immediately began preparations for emergency cardiac catheterization. "We need to get her to the cath lab right now," Dr. Rodriguez announced. "Every minute we delay means more heart muscle dies." As the team prepared to transfer Helen to the cardiac catheterization laboratory, Lisa grabbed Dr. Williams's arm. "What's happening? What's wrong with my mother?" Dr. Williams finally looked directly at Lisa, and she could see something terrible in his eyes. "Your mother is having a heart attack. A serious one. We're going to do everything we can to help her." "A heart attack?" Lisa's voice rose in disbelief. "But you said it was anxiety. You sent us home." "I know," Dr. Williams said quietly. "I made a mistake. A serious mistake." The words hung in the air between them as the reality of the situation sank in. Lisa felt her knees go weak as she understood what had happened. For 2 days, while her mother got sicker and sicker, her heart had been slowly dying. 2 days of pain that could have been prevented if someone had just listened. "How bad is it?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Williams hesitated, not wanting to give false hope, but also not wanting to crush what hope remained. "We won't know the full extent of the damage until Dr. Rodriguez can see what's happening in her heart. But I won't lie to you. The fact that this has been going on for so long makes it very serious." As they wheeled Helen toward the elevators, she reached out weakly and grabbed Lisa's hand. "I knew," she whispered through the oxygen mask. "I knew it wasn't anxiety." Lisa squeezed her mother's hand gently. "I know, Mom. I believed you. I should have made them listen." "Not your fault," Helen breathed. "Love you." "I love you too, Mom. The doctors are going to fix this. You're going to be okay." But even as Lisa said the words, she wasn't sure she believed them. The scared look in Dr. Williams's eyes told her everything she needed to know about how serious this was. Her strong, independent mother was fighting for her life, and it might already be too late. As the elevator doors closed, taking Helen up to the cardiac lab, Dr. Williams stood alone in the emergency room, staring at the EKG strip in his hands. The zigzag lines on the paper told a story of professional failure and human cost that would haunt him for the rest of his career. He had taken an oath to first do no harm, but his assumptions and biases had done tremendous harm to a woman who had simply asked for help. Helen Peterson had trusted him with her life, and he had failed her in the most fundamental way possible. The question now was whether she would survive his mistake, and whether he could live with himself if she didn't. As he looked around the busy emergency room, filled with other patients who needed his care, Dr. Williams realized that everything had changed. He would never again be the confident young doctor who thought he could diagnose a patient in 5 minutes. Helen Peterson had taught him a lesson that no medical school could provide, that behind every patient was a human being whose life depended on him listening carefully and checking his assumptions at the door. The only question was whether that lesson had come too late for both of them. The cardiac catheterization laboratory buzzed with controlled urgency as Helen was wheeled through the heavy doors. "Dr. Rodriguez." and her team had already prepared the room. Knowing that every second counted, Lisa was forced to wait outside in a small family room, pacing back and forth while her mother underwent the procedure that could save her life. Inside the cath lab, Dr. Rodriguez worked quickly to access Helen's heart through a small incision in her wrist. A thin tube called a catheter was threaded through her blood vessels directly to her heart, allowing the doctor to see exactly what was happening inside. When the images appeared on the monitor, Dr. Rodriguez's worst fears were confirmed. The left anterior descending artery, often called the widowmaker because of how often blockages in this vessel prove fatal, was almost completely closed. Only a tiny trickle of blood was getting through to feed the heart muscle. 99% blockage, Dr. Rodriguez announced to her team. And look at the muscle movement on the echo. We've got significant damage already. The heart muscle that should have been contracting strongly was barely moving in some areas. 2.5 days without adequate blood flow had taken a devastating toll. Parts of Helen's heart had already begun to die, and the remaining healthy tissue was struggling to keep her alive. Let's get this artery open, Dr. Rodriguez said, guiding a tiny balloon through the catheter to the blocked area. Prepare the stent. The procedure to open Helen's blocked artery took 45 minutes. Dr. Rodriguez carefully inflated the balloon to crush the blockage against the artery walls, then placed a small metal mesh tube called a stent to keep the vessel open. When blood finally began flowing freely through the artery again, Helen's heart rhythm immediately became more stable. But the damage was already extensive. When Dr. Rodriguez measured Helen's heart function, the results were sobering. Her heart was only working at about 25% of normal capacity. Most of the muscle on the front wall of her heart had been severely damaged or destroyed. After the procedure, Helen was transferred to the cardiac intensive care unit, where she would need constant monitoring and support. Lisa was finally allowed to see her mother, though she was shocked by what she found. Helen lay unconscious, connected to more machines than Lisa had ever seen. A ventilator was breathing for her. Various monitors tracked her heart rhythm and blood pressure, and multiple IV pumps delivered medications to keep her heart beating and her blood pressure stable. Is she going to be okay? Lisa asked Dr. Rodriguez, who had come to explain the situation. Dr. Rodriguez pulled up a chair next to Lisa, her expression serious but kind. Your mother survived a massive heart attack. We were able to open the blocked artery, which probably saved her life, but she suffered significant damage to her heart muscle. What does that mean exactly? About half of her heart isn't working properly anymore. The muscle in that area died while the artery was blocked. Her remaining heart muscle is working very hard to compensate, but it's a struggle. Lisa felt tears welling up in her eyes. Will she recover? Will she be able to live normally again? It's too early to say for certain. The next few days will be critical. We're giving her medications to help her heart pump more effectively and to prevent dangerous rhythm problems. Some people do remarkably well after heart attacks like this, but others, Dr. Rodriguez trailed off, not wanting to destroy all hope. Others don't make it, Lisa finished quietly. We're going to do everything we can for her. Your mother is a fighter. She survived 2.5 days with a blocked artery, which many people wouldn't have. That tells me she's stronger than she looks. Over the next 3 days, Helen's condition fluctuated wildly. Sometimes her blood pressure would drop dangerously low, requiring emergency medications. Other times her heart would beat irregularly, triggering alarms throughout the ICU. Lisa barely left her mother's side, sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair and eating whatever food the nurses brought her. She held Helen's hand constantly, talking to her even though the doctors weren't sure how much Helen could hear while sedated. Dr. Williams visited the ICU several times each day, though he rarely spoke to Lisa directly. The weight of his mistake was evident in his face. He had aged years in just a few days, and other staff members noticed that he was double and triple checking every diagnosis, ordering more tests than ever before. On the second day in the ICU, Helen's blood pressure crashed suddenly during the night shift. Alarms screamed as nurses rushed into the room, adjusting medications and increasing the dosages of drugs that were keeping her heart beating. What's happening? Lisa asked frantically as medical staff worked around her mother's bed. Her heart is struggling, explained Dr. Peterson, the ICU physician. We're giving her more support, but her heart muscle is very weak. For 6 terrifying hours, it looked like Helen might not survive. Her heart function dropped even further. and her kidneys began to show signs of failure from the poor circulation. Lisa sat holding her mother's hand, whispering prayers and promises, begging her to fight. But somehow, as the sun came up on the third day, Helen's condition began to stabilize. Her blood pressure improved slightly and her heart rhythm became more regular. When the medical team reduced her sedation to check her neurological function, Helen squeezed Lisa's hand in response to her voice. "Mom, can you hear me?" Lisa asked, leaning close to her mother's face. Helen's eyes fluttered open for just a moment and she looked directly at her daughter. She couldn't speak because of the breathing tube, but her eyes conveyed everything Lisa needed to know. She was still there, still fighting. Dr. Williams chose that moment to enter the room for his daily check. When he saw Helen's eyes open and alert, he felt a mixture of relief and overwhelming guilt. She had survived his mistake, but at what cost? "How is she doing?" he asked Lisa quietly. Lisa looked at him with exhaustion and anger. "She's alive. No thanks to you." The words hit Dr. Williams harder than any formal complaint or lawsuit could have. "I know you're angry with me. You have every right to be. I failed your mother and I failed you." "Why?" Lisa asked, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you listen to her? Why didn't you run the tests?" Dr. Williams was quiet for a long moment, struggling to find words that could explain the inexplicable. "I made assumptions based on her age and situation. I thought I knew what was wrong without really listening to what she was telling me. There's no excuse for it. She told you it felt different from anxiety. She told you it was real pain. Her daughter told you something was seriously wrong, and you dismissed all of it. You're right. I did dismiss it. And that dismissal nearly cost your mother her life." Lisa turned back to Helen, who was watching the exchange with alert but tired eyes. "The doctors say you're going to be okay, Mom. It's going to be a long recovery, but you're going to make it." Helen tried to nod, though the breathing tube made it difficult. She was alive, and for now that was enough. But she knew that her life would never be the same. Her heart was permanently damaged, and she would need medications and careful monitoring for the rest of her days. More importantly, her faith in the medical system had been shattered. She had learned that being an elderly woman meant her concerns might not be taken seriously, that her pain might be dismissed as emotional rather than physical, and that advocating for herself wasn't always enough. As Dr. Williams left the room, he knew that Helen Peterson had changed him forever. Her case would be presented at the hospital's monthly review meeting, where medical errors are discussed to prevent future mistakes. New protocols would be put in place requiring more thorough cardiac evaluation for elderly patients with chest pain. But for Dr. Williams, the changes would be much more personal. He would never again assume he knew what was wrong with a patient without doing proper tests. He would listen more carefully, check his biases more thoroughly, and remember that behind every set of symptoms was a human being, whose life depended on him getting it right. Helen Peterson had survived his mistake, but the lesson of her near death would echo through the halls of Riverside Medical Center for years to come. Sometimes the most powerful education comes not from textbooks or lectures, but from the consequences of our failures and the grace of those who forgive us despite the harm we've caused. On the fourth morning, something miraculous happened. Helen's heart rhythm had remained stable throughout the night, and her blood pressure was holding steady without as much medication support. Dr. Peterson made the decision to try, removing the breathing tube. Lisa held her breath as the respiratory therapist carefully removed the tube from her mother's throat. Helen coughed and gasped for a few moments, then took her first independent breath in days. Her voice was hoarse and weak, but she was breathing on her own. "Water," Helen whispered, her throat raw from the breathing tube. Lisa quickly offered her mother some ice chips, watching with relief as Helen's eyes stayed focused and alert. "How do you feel, Mom?" Helen considered the question carefully. Her chest still ached, but it was different now. More like the soreness after surgery rather than the crushing pain she had experienced for those terrible days. "Tired," she finally answered, "but better." Over the next few hours, Helen's condition continued to improve gradually. She was able to sit up slightly in bed and even managed to drink some water without nausea. The cardiac monitor showed that while her heart was still weak, it was functioning more reliably than it had since her arrival. Dr. Rodriguez visited that afternoon with encouraging news. "Your heart is showing signs of stabilization. We're going to move you to the regular cardiac unit tomorrow if you continue improving. Will I be okay? Helen asked directly. She had always appreciated straight answers, and her recent experience had made her even more determined to understand exactly what was happening to her body. Your heart has been permanently damaged, Dr. Rodriguez explained honestly. You'll need to take medications for the rest of your life, and you'll have to be careful about physical activity. But many people live full, meaningful lives after heart attacks like yours. What about Dr. Williams? Helen asked quietly. I'd like to speak with him. Lisa looked surprised. Mom, you don't owe him anything. He almost killed you with his negligence. That's exactly why I want to talk to him, Helen replied. I have some things I need to say. Dr. Williams was hesitant when the nurse told him that Helen wanted to see him. He had been dreading this conversation, expecting anger and accusations that he knew he deserved. But when he entered her room, Helen's expression was calmer than he had anticipated. Sit down, doctor, Helen said, gesturing to the chair beside her bed. Dr. Williams sat down nervously, unsure what to expect. Mrs. Peterson, I want you to know how sorry I am. There's no excuse for what happened. I should have listened to you and your daughter. I should have run proper tests. Helen studied his face for a long moment. She could see the genuine remorse in his eyes, the weight of his mistake evident in every line of his face. You're young, she finally said. How long have you been practicing medicine? 2 years as a resident, he answered quietly. I figured as much. You have the confidence of someone who thinks he knows everything, but you haven't lived long enough to understand how much you don't know. Dr. Williams nodded, not trusting himself to speak. I forgive you, Helen said simply. The words hit Dr. Williams like a physical blow. He had expected anger, threats, lawsuits. He had not expected grace. You forgive me? After what I put you through? I forgive you because holding on to anger will hurt me more than it hurts you. But I want you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that you'll learn from this. Promise me that you'll never dismiss another patient's concerns the way you dismissed mine. Promise me that my suffering will mean something. Dr. Williams felt tears in his eyes. I promise. Your case is already being presented at our medical review conference next week. We're changing our protocols to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Good. But I want more than policy changes. I want you to remember that every patient who comes through those emergency room doors is someone's mother, father, sister, brother. We're not just collections of symptoms to be diagnosed quickly so you can move on to the next case. You're absolutely right. Helen shifted slightly in her bed, wincing with the movement. When I came to you that night, I was scared and in pain. I needed someone to listen to me and take my concerns seriously. Instead, I got someone who had already decided what was wrong before he even examined me properly. I made assumptions based on your age and circumstances, Dr. Williams admitted. I thought I was being efficient, but I was being careless. Do you know what the worst part was? Helen asked. It wasn't the pain or even the fear that I might die. It was feeling invisible, feeling like my voice didn't matter because I was an elderly woman who had recently lost her husband. Dr. Williams felt the full impact of her words. I'm so sorry. I see now how I failed you, and I swear it will never happen again. The next day, Helen was moved to the regular cardiac floor, where she began the slow process of recovering from her heart attack. Physical therapists helped her walk short distances, and occupational therapists taught her how to conserve energy during daily activities. Lisa was amazed by her mother's resilience. Despite everything she had been through, Helen approached her recovery with determination and grace. She followed all her doctor's instructions, took her medications religiously, and never complained about the limitations her damaged heart would impose on her life. You're remarkable, Mom, Lisa said one afternoon as they walked slowly down the hospital corridor. I don't know how you're handling this so well. I'm alive, Helen replied simply. After those awful days when I thought no one believed me, just being alive feels like a gift. A week after her conversation with Dr. Williams, Helen received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Williams knocked softly on her door, carrying a small potted plant and looking nervous. I hope you don't mind, he said. I wanted to update you on some changes we're making at the hospital. Helen smiled and gestured for him to sit down. I'd like to hear about that. We've implemented new protocols for elderly patients presenting with chest pain. Every patient over 65 now gets an automatic EKG and cardiac enzyme testing, regardless of their psychiatric history or presenting circumstances. That's a good start. We're also implementing mandatory bias training for all emergency room staff. We want to make sure everyone understands how assumptions about age, gender, and other factors can cloud medical judgment. Helen nodded approvingly. What about you personally? How are you handling all this? Dr. Williams was quiet for a moment. I've been seeing a counselor to work through what happened. I've also decided to specialize in geriatric emergency medicine. I want to become an expert in caring for elderly patients so that I can make sure they get the attention and respect they deserve. I think that's wonderful, Helen said sincerely. You made a terrible mistake, but you're learning from it. That's all any of us can do. As Dr. Williams prepared to leave, Helen called him back. Doctor, I want you to have something. She reached into her bedside table and pulled out a small notebook. I've been writing down my thoughts about this experience. I want you to read it whenever you need to remember why careful listening matters. Dr. Williams accepted the notebook with shaking hands. Thank you. I'll treasure this. After he left, Lisa shook her head in amazement. I still can't believe you forgave him so easily. Forgiveness isn't about him, Helen explained. It's about me choosing not to let bitterness poison the rest of my life. Besides, his mistake taught me something important too. What's that? It taught me that I have to be my own advocate. I can't assume that being polite and trusting will always be enough. Sometimes I have to demand to be heard. Helen's recovery continued steadily over the following weeks. When she was finally discharged from the hospital, she went home with a detailed plan for cardiac rehabilitation and a list of medications that would help protect her damaged heart. But Helen didn't stop there. She began speaking at medical conferences about her experience, sharing her story with doctors and nurses who needed to understand the human cost of medical bias and assumptions. Her presentations were powerful and moving, combining medical facts with personal narrative in a way that reached healthcare providers on both intellectual and emotional levels. I'm not angry, she would tell her audiences. I'm here to make sure this doesn't happen to other people. Every patient deserves to be heard, regardless of their age, gender, or circumstances. Dr. Williams often attended these presentations, sitting in the back of the room and listening as Helen shared their story. Each time he was struck anew by her grace and determination to turn her suffering into something meaningful. 6 months after her heart attack, Helen received a letter from Riverside Medical Center. The hospital was establishing the Helen Peterson Patient Advocacy Award, given annually to healthcare providers who demonstrated exceptional commitment to listening to and advocating for their patients. When Helen read the letter, she smiled through her tears. Her pain had not been in vain. Somewhere in the future, other patients would receive better care because of what she had endured. The heart attack had changed Helen's life forever. She would always live with the limitations of her damaged heart, and she would never forget the feeling of being dismissed when she needed help most. But she had also discovered a strength she didn't know she possessed and a purpose that gave meaning to her suffering. Most importantly, she had learned that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to choose how we respond. Helen chose forgiveness over bitterness, education over revenge, and hope over despair. In doing so, she transformed a medical tragedy into a force for positive change that would benefit patients for years to come. Dr. Williams kept Helen's notebook on his desk throughout his residency and into his career as a geriatric emergency medicine specialist. Whenever he felt the temptation to rush through a diagnosis or dismiss a patient's concerns, he would read her words and remember the lesson she had taught him about the sacred trust between doctor and patient. The story of Helen Peterson and Dr. Williams became legend at Riverside Medical Center, passed down from one generation of medical students to the next. It served as a powerful reminder that medicine is not just about diagnosing diseases and prescribing treatments, but about seeing and honoring the humanity in every person who seeks our help.